Has your marriage changed since your wedding day? You don't know when it happened or exactly how it happened, but you know it's different. You can feel it. Hi there, I'm Lillian. Welcome. If you've landed on this page, it means you're not satisfied with the way your marriage has turned out, and you're looking for a solution. It's either stalled out and going nowhere, or it's marked with constant struggles and conflicts that never get resolved, so you don't experience that closure that's supposed to bring you closer to each other. You're at a loss, and you feel like all that conflict is somehow your fault, because you can never find resolution, peace, or unity. And even though you know in your head you're part of a couple, on the outside you look like a couple, yet your heart feels like you're married to a single person. You feel lonely and disconnected most of the time. What I've come to understand is that there's 3 different kinds of men in marriage, and unless you had the opportunity and guidance to thoroughly understand your femininity and wisely embody it, it's challenging to truly know what kind of man you've married until after the wedding day. This isn't your fault. Many of us weren't given the tools or the knowledge to navigate this decision before we got married. The first kind of man is the one who cleaves to his wife. He loves women and understands femininity, at least at a basic level. With this kind of husband, there's going to be some difficulties and struggles and trials, but the main sign of health is that there's 0 dysfunction. He's the type of husband who is either actively researching blogs and books to find out what he doesn't know about marriage, or he's the one who writes the books and blogs about marriage. These are the husbands that present relationship information or marriage counsel on videos and podcasts together with their wives. They get it and want to help others get it. And that's great. But most of what you hear about marriage from these kinds of couples, it doesn't fit for your marriage because you're not married to a type 1 husband. And that makes you feel like a failure. A type 1 husband embodies qualities like Boaz or Joseph, or he's a blend of both. Wives who are married to a Boaz or a Joseph type, they're not the ones who need help with a dysfunctional or troubled marriage. They're not the ones looking for guidance and support. It's the wives who are married to a type 2 husband or a type 3 man. They're the ones really struggling. It's those wives who scour the internet looking for some kind of thread of hope for their marriage. If you're not married to a type 1 husband, then you're married to either a type 2 or a type 3 husband. If your husband is the second kind of man, he genuinely loves women and desires to cleave to his wife. However, he struggles to understand the differences between masculinity and femininity. He can read the words in Ephesians 5 where God's telling him to love his wife like his own body, yet he fails to grasp the full meaning of their mystery. He can see that your physical body's different from his, but he doesn't comprehend the intricacies that come with your feminine nature, or that your operating system is in contrast to his masculinity. He wants to be the head of the relationship and provide for your femininity, but he lacks the language to express this deep-seated feeling that's in him. He sees you as a woman and acknowledges your differences, yet when he looks at you, he views you more like a complicated problem to solve rather than a complex journey to experience. This perspective comes from his own unhealed wounds. Without doing the internal work that would heal his masculinity, he remains immature and limited in his ability to fully engage in a healthy relationship with his wife's femininity. Husband number 2 is the Abraham type. He has deep failures in faith that get played out in the relationship he shares with his wife. This unhealed state prevents a husband from truly seeing and appreciating femininity, not out of intentional neglect, but because his own damage creates a huge log in his eye and it blinds him. And then there's the type 3 man. He's the Nabal type. This third kind of man is dangerous. because he has weaponized his masculinity to pretend like he's a man who's wounded and dysfunctional when it comes to relationships. But you know what? He's really not. This kind of man has studied women to find all the weaknesses of his wife's particular brand of femininity. Because he doesn't like women, he believes the only worth a woman has is when she's in service to a man, that the female creature is created specifically to make his life easier and less burdensome. The more she serves him, the more value she demonstrates. Husband number 3 is the type of man that uses religion and masculine interpretation to twist God's word so that he can control his wife, not in headship as the source for the body, but so that he can dominate her femininity into providing for his masculinity. He's dangerous because he hunted for a woman who demonstrates all the markers of the kind of femininity that's got that blazing light inside of her. She's high on adaptability and kindness, and she's extremely loyal and never gives up on any person. These sound like great traits in a wife, except for if your femininity is misunderstood or it's weak and unhealed. What that means is that you end up being a codependent people pleaser who's full of femininity that's powerless. When you're married to a Nabal, you enable your husband to sin against your feminine heart instead of guarding it. So for 34 years, I believed that my husband was just a really broken Abraham type who didn't understand my feminine heart, and that's what made my marriage highly conflicted, isolating, lonely, and painful. And that one day God would save him and he'd magically become like husband number 1. The problem was that I didn't understand enough theology to know that he wasn't just an unbeliever that hadn't accepted God yet. He wasn't a sleeping sheep like I had been. I'd never been taught about the reality of evil that lives amongst true believers. I mean, I had read the verses about goats, tares, and wolves, and that true believers are few, and that the many are all the rest. But there was a disconnect inside my mind. I had no idea what the difference between the many and the few looked like. I didn't know the difference between a man who's wounded or broken and real evil. I didn't know how to conceptualize it. No one teaches you that at a ladies' Bible study or in a marriage conference, and you never hear it preached from the pulpit. Not the way Jesus taught the apostles, and not the way Peter, Paul, and James write about it in the New Testament. So, the man pretending to be my husband was a wolf in sheep's clothing, but I didn't have the biblical knowledge or the feminine skills and healing to understand that I was never going to have an equally yoked marriage, because God does not make a one-flesh relationship out of darkness and light. He separates it. That's the good news I share here. As soon as you start to understand the feminine heart that God created you with, as soon as you allow him to heal and sanctify your inner girl, all that codependency and all that people-pleasing that's been keeping you powerless, it all begins to disappear, and they're organically replaced by powerful feminine boundaries that God meant for you to have all along. Don't get disheartened. God is still on his throne, and you're still his daughter, and he loves you so much. He will finish the good work he started in you, even if that means he has to rescue you from your own marriage first.